this is the Sister Sit Down.
I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Desiree.
And we are two progressive sisters having a sit-down conversation about things that are important to us.
Okay, so Texas has frozen over. Who's to blame? There are many answers to that.
I'm sure there's lots of people who are to blame for all of this because in Texas we have a lot of greed.
Natural energy is not the answer. The Green New Deal, not what is to blame, but that is what our politicians are pointing at.
So this shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America.
Abbott pointed the finger, and who else? You said Cornyn also at renewable energy?
I'm sure Senator Cruz did as well. I'll double check on his Twitter real quick. But most of the Republicans in the state of Texas are gonna say those things.
Renewable energy, is that to blame? The Green New Deal, is that to blame? Like, no, that's as far. They are like not even in the picture.
Yeah, I think unfortunately this is being used as an opportunity to talk about the weaknesses of renewable energy resources when, this has been primarily a thermal energy problem. Wind and solar resources have operated at grid operators' expectation throughout this entire crisis. And frankly, most of the power that the grid operator expected to be online in terms of these extreme weather events during peak capacity hours is thermal plants. So unfortunately, I think the fingers are being pointed in the wrong direction.
Green New Deal hasn't even been enacted yet. So the infrastructure failures in Texas are quite literally what happens when you don't pursue a Green New Deal. Weak on sweeping next generation public infrastructure investments, little focus on equity so communities are left behind, climate deniers and leadership so they don't long prep for disaster. We need to help people now. Long term, we must realize these are the consequences of inaction.
But people are angry. People are really angry, and they don't know who to blame. And Abbott's like, well, we need to investigate ERCOT. They're now being the ones there that Abbott held accountable. So like everyone's mad at them. They're the easy target.
Yeah, of course.
From ERCOT. ERCOT is the organization that is operating the transmission across the entire state of Texas. ERCOT has not been transparent about this. We, all of us, need answers and transparency from ERCOT to make sure that people get the answers they need.
But Abbott is responsible for appointing 3 commissioners to PUC, which is the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and they oversee ERCOT. So, I mean, it all comes back to Governor Abbott. I feel like he's been in office for too long.
I listened to the ERCOT's Q&A twice. And the first time, I felt like they weren't being straightforward, and I wasn't able to I was trying to have it pick apart, like, what are they saying that actually means something and what are they saying that doesn't, because they were being very skirty around the issue of, who is at fault. And it could be read as them dodging responsibility, but from the more I've looked into them, I don't think they're dodging responsibility. They're basically saying, you can investigate us if you want to. We're actually doing a Q&A, the 2 men that are speaking. I'm assuming that they're both CEOs. Are they to blame? No, it's not their fault. I'm going to start with that. Do they need to be investigated? The whole system needs to be investigated. ERCOT is saying, you know what? You want to investigate us? Investigate us. We will cooperate fully. They've done a Q&A on YouTube, and a lot of the questions are questions we want answers to. And they got thrown under the bus, and they don't seem to mind. Like, I think that was their job. They exist to be thrown under the bus. And I think that's it. And they have things that they do, but the things they do don't really matter much. I don't know that they matter much. They matter a little bit, to the extent that companies that own generators for fuel of whatever kind care is how much ERCOT matters and makes a difference. And let me explain why. So ERCOT, first of all, ERCOT is very clear that it is not just renewables, that it is every kind of energy we have in Texas across the board have failed. All of our energy productions have failed. And
I will say that we had generating units that of every type that had, for different reasons, went offline during this event. So that 46,000 megawatt number is coal units, nuclear units, gas units, wind turbines, and there are reductions even in solar. So that we just it in different ways, like very cold weather and snow and those kind of things has impacted every type of generator. Yeah.
All of them failed. So ERCOT's job is to create best practices for preparing your power generators, whether they be renewable or fossil fuel, either way. They have best practices that they set up, and they use 2011's winter as their benchmark for setting those best practices.
Back in 2011, we had a large number of outages of generators back in a cold spell that happened in February of 2011. And after that event, there were lots of investigations kind of on to try to come up with what went wrong, what happened to these generators that caused them to go offline. And the generators shared information with each other on kind of what were those things and developed a set of best practices, not only for the generators here in ERCOT, but national.
And that was like you said, it showed us what we needed to be prepared for, and then proceed to not prepare for it.
And so what we saw between 2011, we had a similar cold spell to 2011 in 2018. It was similarly cold, similarly windy, and we had very few generating units trip offline. And so it appeared that those best practices and what the generators were doing in that regard was working. But
they spot check 100 of the 600 energy producers that are in their domain. This year, they did have to go virtual, so that could have made their spot checks a little less
thorough.
Thank you.
Thorough. I guess you can't really see like weathering and all that from computer camera or whatever may have been an issue. Yeah, I could see that being part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. And they only do 100 out of 600. So what about the other 500? How much ERCOT's at fault would be how much did these power generators need and want and were willing to have ERCOT? There were some good actors who wanted to do the right thing, and we don't know how much ERCOT failed the good actors. We don't know that. We know that, but they basically, from what I gathered from the interview, is they're there to help, but there are no punishments. There are no there's no enforcement. This is not a thing that we can enforce. There are no regulations.
But that we will be calling all of the utilities before the state legislature to get answers from them why their equipment was not winterized to protect against this type of situation.
There's no requirement to do that. There are financial incentives. I learned from ERCOT there are financial incentives to have people follow their best practices, but these are best practices. They are not mandates. They're not laws. They're not regulations. They're best practices. Adopt them or don't. It's up to you. And I think the majority of our for-profit energy producers decided that they didn't need to adopt these best practices because they cost money. So who's to blame for not having winterized equipment? For a large part, I think it's the private energy producers, whether it be of renewables or fossil fuels. The people who own those, they failed to winterize, and maybe a handful of them tried and needed better guidance from ERCOT, but I believe that the majority of them simply didn't want to spend the money. ERCOT, they don't have a lot of power. So to blame ERCOT is like, for Abbott to point the finger at ERCOT is for Abbott to point the finger at an authority that has no authority in the situation.
And I really think it's also him pointing his finger at himself, because he appoints the commissioners that oversee ERCOT. So in a way, if he really was concerned, he would have appointed commissioners that take this stuff very seriously and would have prepared and made sure that ERCOT wouldn't have allowed this to happen if he really believes it's ERCOT's fault.
You would have expected, we expected, that the utilities would have winterized their equipment for something like this. Although we do have to understand the last time something like this happened was more than 100 years ago.
We believe that for-profit power industries would not be winterizing based on ERCOT's best practices either way. So ERCOT can't force them to. ERCOT can only help them and give them financial incentive, but they have no power to actually make sure that our state has winterized our power plants, our power producers. ERCOT doesn't have any power to do that.
Those are not mandatory. It's a voluntary guideline for the individual generation companies to decide to do those things. And they have financial incentive to be able to participate in the market to follow those and stay online, but there's no regulations at this point.
So Abbott appointed people to oversee a thing, but then gave them no authority to oversee it. So AEP, Encore, and Centerpoint are the ones who said, we're not going to rotate. It's too much work.
And then pointed their fingers at ERCOT.
So everyone's pointing their fingers at ERCOT, and ERCOT's like, investigate us. Go ahead.
It sounds to me like they've done what they could, and it goes back to the legislation and the laws and policies that we have in place.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to protect us from these power companies, and we can't sue them for what happened either. They didn't break any laws from my understanding, but I feel like there should be some laws to protected us from the actions of all of these decision makers, because these are really life and death decisions that have been made, and there's no consequences for making the wrong decisions, because I truly believe a lot of wrong decisions were made these past couple of days, and it affected millions and millions of people.
And it's going to be a while as we see stories unravel and see how bad people died in a house fire. We know in Houston, and we don't, well, Sugarland, which is outside of Houston, and we don't know how, we know that 2 people survived. We don't know if it was in their fireplace or what happened, but we know that children and an elderly woman were killed in the fire. The mom tried to go back in for her mother and her children, and they didn't let her go back in, and they perished in the fire.
About 325,000 Texans were still without power, but not for lack of ability to generate power, he said. Encore Electric Delivery said early Thursday that it was able to end controlled power outages previously necessary through this week's extreme winter weather, though thousands of North Texas homes were still without power due to damaged equipment.
They were supposed to rotate it so that no one went through like freezing weather with 0 degrees temperatures outside with no way to heat their houses. We were supposed to be going, we were told, we even got the text that it would be about 45 minutes to an hour, and it shouldn't be longer than that. And then the next thing we know, we're all without power for days. Some people still without power. Is ERCOT shutting off our power? The answer to that is no. I heard them talking and they kept saying we tell them and they shut off your power. And we want them to do and they're like, well, why didn't you do a rotating thing? And I mentioned this yesterday when we were talking, I said that they actually said they didn't do it because it was too hard. But when I listened more carefully, yeah, they did. They said they didn't do it because it was too hard. They did it the easy way. And then it's like, well, who's they? Who did it the easy way, which was the way that we all just froze and didn't actually rotate? It's the people who are in control of the grids. And remember yesterday you mentioned to me, you said this is from AEP and I didn't know what that was. And you explained it to me.
Mm-hmm.
They control South Texas's grid.
Yeah, they're considered like a utility company or something, I thought.
Are they?
But
so I don't know that they may also be a utility company also, but the other two are Encore and Centerpoint. So we've got AEP, Encore, and Centerpoint. They control the grid. They manage grid distribution. And they are the ones who are not rotating power outages. In fact, they've changed the name. It was ERCOT recommended rotating power outages. These companies that control the grid changed the name to controlled power outages.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now I'm going to go find out.
Right to be blaming AEP all along.
Yes, you were. You
was on
pointed that out.
Page like AEP, I am mad at you.
Yes. And so here's the thing though, is that once I found that out, right, they're the ones that we should be mad at. They're also giving information. What they're doing is they're getting an order from ERCOT and it says, this is how much power you can afford to distribute to your grid. And they have the places by the hospitals and then their reignite spots. Those spots don't go out. They're like the last to ever go out. And then beyond that, I don't know how they decide who gets shut off.
Due to new units coming offline and some of them around the greater Houston area, we were then told to take more load off the system. So that's a challenge, and we did it. And we've been doing that in our automated technology system remotely.
They're a business and we're the customers and they want us to know what's going on. There are things that they're leaving out and they're also being very delicate about the idea of not talking about regulations and government oversight or anything like that. They mentioned ERCOT an awful lot.
Yeah, and it's crazy because ERCOT doesn't own electricity, but these people are saying that they don't own electricity.
They don't. Okay, so ERCOT doesn't own it and they don't own it unless yours might have AEP might. I don't know about AEP, but they don't own it. They control the grid. Their whole job is basically to take the grid and push buttons and lights go off, and that's what they do, right? That's their little grid masters. That's their job. They are companies that control the grid. And so AEP controls South Texas, Encore controls Central Texas, and Centerpoint controls Houston. And I'm not sure how much more, what other, outside of Houston, but the Houston area of Texas and a little bit north of that. So they are the ones that have made decisions about your power. And they're the reason that I didn't have power for 48 hours. Thank you.
Because we thought that was just like the best thing to do. They'll be fine.
So, yeah.
Yeah, AEP even put out a statement that said, if you're on life support, we suggest you call friends or a family member.
But there were certain areas that needed to be protected because they had essential infrastructure. Downtown Houston being one of those areas. And so each of these companies, each of these cities and locales will have certain points, either because they're downtown. We don't really know all the factors, but the ones that they've been willing to tell us are if there's like hospitals. And then Kenny Mercado from Centerpoint, he said that he got asked about, like, hey, why are these big empty office buildings lit up when we're over here freezing? What's up with that? And he said that he made outreach to businesses to get them to shut down their lights and conserve.
Had anybody been in touch with those businesses, and why was there even power to those in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, we do have accounts with customers in the commercial areas like downtown and then also all across Houston, Texas, and we've been in contact with them. We've asked them to conserve. You heard me say this yesterday. If you have an empty school or an empty office building, conserve, please. We need you to conserve. And we actually, overall, we got a lot of good feedback from conservation, and I would say, in big terms, the conservation efforts that occurred yesterday made a really big impact, and it helped avoid additional customer outages. Now today, we're looking at manual ways. We're going to manually find ways to get into some of these bigger buildings. It's more complicated. You can't do it remotely, but we're going to go in manually, and we're going to start taking larger loads off to support the whole city of Houston. We're going to do what we can to do it safely. We won't compromise critical loads, but we will be in those areas. And if we continue down this path and we do not have the relief in generation, you will see a lot more bigger buildings without power moving forward.
There's an interview with a woman from Encore. I can't find her face or anything. She's just kind of a face. Her name's not tied to the video, and I can't find anything about her. And you go to Encore's site, she's not listed anywhere on the website, but she is the face of the video, and she's interviewed by William J.
ERCOT gives us the direction to drop load or pick up load. We do that as quickly as we can, and it's based on the grid needs. It's based on those load needs. So for the hospitals and critical areas, again, we strive to keep those on. So if you live close enough or attached to that same equipment, it's possible that you won't lose power as you're in that same connection with the hospital. We can't cut down to the exact address. We can't exempt a single address. It's just the way that the electric system is built up, essentially. So those critical areas are something that we're seeing where that power is staying on, and therefore if you are connected to that equipment, you may also be staying on. Secondly, we have areas across our service territory, and this is just spread out geographically diverse, that kind of serve as areas of last resort. So they have two, I'm going to get technical here for you, William,
yeah,
so tell me if you need to break it down.
That's fine.
So they have two roles. So on one end, you could think of them almost as a campfire that you're putting out, but you need to keep it going for the next day. So maybe you leave a couple embers. So as we're turning the power off, we have these controlled outages. There's small pockets that we need to keep powered up, because when we do need to repower those areas, we can't start at zero. You need to have that ember in order to protect the integrity of our own system. So that way, when all these connections come back on, they have something to hold on to, essentially, in simplest terms.
Yeah.
So that's one role of those areas, is that it helps keep our system stable when we're able to return power. It makes it easier to turn power back on because these already exist as the embers that we can use to restart that fire. Secondly,
go ahead, sir.
Secondly, they also serve as this area of last resort. If generation drops significantly into potentially dangerous levels, these areas are designed so that they will shut off power automatically. We don't need our operations personnel to identify the needs, match the loads, or the call from ERCOT. It's a built-in safeguard for the system that if the generation drops too low and there's a true threat to the whole integrity of the grid, these places will all drop at once like that. So we need to have that backup in place so we don't have any, we hope we never get there, but you need to have that backup to make sure that you don't have cascading blackout impacts.
Can we rotate where those pockets are, or are they just in a fixed spot?
For the most part, they're in a fixed spot just because the way that they're set up. It starts getting into some very technical engineering terms with frequency and all such. And so I'm doing all I can to put it in a way that, you know, your viewers and our customers understand.
The representative from Encore didn't explain it, except that she explained that there were certain points that would not get shut off, hospitals and reignite points. So she says that in addition to if you're near enough to a hospital, you won't get cut off. So that whole area doesn't get shut off. So all those people have been with power this whole time. And she also said that there's another group of people that have had power the whole time. And she said to think of it like a campfire that you're going to want to restart. Then you don't put the fire out completely, you leave embers. And then that way you can later use those embers to kind of stoke and restoke the fire. And so she thinks of these little control areas as embers. And those are like little neighborhoods or little spots throughout their grid that they control, which is all of Central Texas. Those areas maintain light. And I think it has probably a lot to do with distance from certain points. You know, they probably need, she didn't explain it thoroughly because she said it's really all into engineering and frequencies and stuff like that, but that she didn't, but I mean, I imagine that there's a lot of logistics that go into how these are located and where they are. And she said that there's no way to change that. Those are pretty fixed. So the people who didn't lose power this round, that's the reason. That's why they live in either the hospital zone or a zone protected as a kind of a reignite zone. There are certain people, if you haven't lost power yet, if you're one of those people like, I haven't lost power, what about me? You're not going to lose power. Lucky you. She talks a couple of times, the Encore representative, about how vital it is that they do what they're doing. She mentions that the whole system could collapse if they didn't do what they did.
You know, if we were not able to implement these rotating outages or these controlled outages, if we weren't able to drop the load as ERCOT has directed us, you could possibly see cascading impacts that could lead to a blackout or a collapse of the system, which it's hard to picture now as we're all sitting here cold and without power, but having that kind of a blackout would be a long-term substantial event that we absolutely don't want to get to. So all of this comes to, you know, as customers are seeing this, you know, fluctuation, our goal is to get the power on as soon as we safely can, but we're also just trying to protect that electric grid.
She doesn't explain, and I mean, for a lot of us, I mean, we feel like the system collapsed, and she acknowledges that we do feel that way, but she's like, you don't understand, like if it actually collapsed, it would be a lot worse than this. But I don't even know if they needed more staff, if it was a matter of laziness or a matter of being understaffed. I don't know what it is. That we don't know. But they basically decided that they would just shut us off and then forget about it. And when you listen to their story, it sounds like what they're saying is that they would try to start restoring power, but then they would hear from ERCOT that they needed to cut even more. And so basically, instead of restoring power, they just cut more people's power and then more people's power and more people's power. But meanwhile, there are pockets of people. I don't know, am I getting the impression, is the takeaway that they actually cut everyone's power except for the big businesses, the business sectors that didn't necessarily need to be cut? I mean, on, because they had empty buildings with lights on. Did they actually get it down to the only thing that were on were the hospital areas and the little reignition spots? Was it that bad? And if it was, still maybe, yeah, I mean, it must have been that bad. It must have been that close to the catastrophe that the Encore rep. Otherwise, because I mean, the impression I'm getting when I hear they're like, if you'd never lost power, you're probably in a place where you never would, kind of thing, which means you're probably in a reignition spot or close enough to a hospital. And I think that anyone close to a water plant, if these companies do the easy, obvious choice, if you're near a water plant, then you will also in the future be a part of one of those reignition spots or safe spots, because I think that was a big mistake to let the water plants get shut down, that they didn't need to make. They could have cut some business sections off, because
I would
so I'm
also
gonna
say that water plants tend to be in lower income areas. Water treatment plants tend to be in lower income areas, so that could be good for, you know, lower income families to know that if they are near a water plant. But that's probably the reason why they got shut off, is because they're typically in a lower income area, and so the lower income area was targeted, got shut off, and then they were like, oh wait, there's a water plant there, oops.
Water plants to our cities were not excluded from their power outages. Hospitals were, so good. Water plants were not.
Which
So,
doesn't make any sense.
So all the water plants in Texas lost power because AEP, Encore, and Centerpoint did not factor in water plants as water treatment plants as one of the places that should be protected from a deliberate power outage. So they didn't just, I thought that our water plant got frozen over, or that, you know, I thought it was no, it wasn't. They were all shut out. So the whole state of Texas is on a boil alert for I don't know how long, but I'm sure you're also on boil alert where you are.
Yeah, I think so.
We are all on boil alert because all of our water plants got turned off. So this city council member in Leander, Christine Zetterquist, she put up a video and I recommend checking it out. It's pretty great. Let me just show you a little bit of it, where she explains some of this.
Hey everybody, this is Christine Zetterquist from Leander City Council, coming to you live and cold and on day who knows what of our local apocalypse. But I'm hanging in there. I know you guys are too. I started out today by starting a fire in my kitchen that I couldn't put out because I had no water, so I just threw the fire thing into the sink and let it burn out. So can't shower the smoke smell out, so that was a good start. And then I slipped on like 2 inches of ice in my backyard trying to get snow so that we could flush toilets. And so it's been really exciting, and I think we're all going to come out of this a little tougher. So our water treatment plant has been out because it was getting hit with all of these rolling power outages, right? Over and over and over. So I know that our staff has been working literally around the clock to try and deal with all of the emergencies that are coming up at once. Like, they've got contingency plans for everything and all these emergency plans, and they're going and activating them, and they need a contingency to the contingency, and then a contingency to that contingency. Like, it has been Murphy's Law on everything. But the water thing was horrible. And so last night I reached out to our PEC rep, Emily Pataki, and she's been our rep for several years, and I was just like, this is terrible. And I'm sure that our staff has been reaching out as well. Emily is amazing. She got the water to the water plant to stay on electricity. We are now on the essential grid that is not being shut off. So I asked for clarification from the city. It is now 5:45, 4 hours ago. I still haven't gotten anything from them. I'm hoping that they'll give us a ballpark or just an update on what's going on. But the good news is that as of last night, we are no longer getting power outages at that facility. So at least we can start to bring things back up to normal. And expect that when we do have water, we're going to have to boil it for a while, because all the water is going to have to be sampled and go to TCEQ and pass their tests. And we're not the only place without water. So water from all sorts of different municipalities is going to be getting tested. So if you are feeling the way I am right now, I am okay with boiling water as long as I can take a shower. Like, that's it. That's all I want in the world. So I will take it, and I'm hoping that we have an announcement from the city on that very, very soon.
Because they lost water, their warming center, which was in the Leander, is closed down because they don't have water anymore. And so now you've got to travel quite a distance on icy roads to get to a warming center, because the nearest one is much further away because Leander lost its power. I mean, it's water, not its power. Encore probably should have had water treatment facilities as a protected part of their grid.
I mean, we need water. We
So
need power.
that big mistake, and I hope, I mean, they all say they're going to review and learn from it. Well, I don't know that they all do, but Kenny Mercado of Centerpoint says he's going to review and learn for it. He actually goes on to say that Texas has the best power grid system in the nation, in the world, or whatever. He's very proud of it. So
Okay.
ERCOT and the Texas grid is unique. And I tend to think it's one of the best there is in the world because we have very affordable electricity. We have really good supply, a balanced supply of different sources of generation. We're growing wind, we're growing solar, it's cleaning up. We have to learn from what occurred in this event. I think you heard from the mayor earlier today that we're really good at summers because every summer is hotter than the previous summer. What's been going on, Amy, in the last few years is the winters have been warmer and warmer, and they really haven't been, addressed. And then 10 years ago, we had a really cold winter, and it discovered some issues. This time around, we've had a record cold winter, and it's clearly discovered some weak links, some areas that we need to do better. I think we can take the grid, we can listen to the mistakes that were made or the errors that are in place, and clearly make this an opportunity and to build from it and take some best practice approaches and improve our processes. I do think that we can address this and keep our grid moving forward and still be very, very proud of it in the future.
Okay, Kenny. All right, that's enough. That's enough from you, Kenny.
let me show you a couple of things. Okay.
Kenny probably never shut off his own power grid to his house. That was probably protected.
Kind of wonder, but he makes sure to look cold in his interview. But there's a difference between Kenny Mercado cold and Christine Sedequist cold. He points to that we're getting greener and cleaning up, and he also admits that we've got to learn from their mistakes. And I would say one mistake you made to learn from is water treatment plants need to be protected. Okay, the other mistake is you did not roll it out for us. You did not rotate us. You did, all three of you did controlled power outages, which were not super well controlled, and nor were they fair. Actually, you know what? Forget about fair. I love fairness and everything. They were unsafe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that brings us back to our leadership and legislation, our legislators in Texas, because they're the ones who allowed this privatization to take place. They're the ones who decided to create ERCOT and make it totally private. They're the ones who decided to create this system the way it is. So it's insane to me that there's no regulations whatsoever. And there's no laws. I mean, it should be illegal that they let happen.
The other problem is the Lone Star power grid. Texas has its own power grid, and we saw Kenny Mercado from Centerpoint saying it was awesome that we have our own power grid and we get cheap prices, right? But is it really worth that cost? Is it worth that for us to stick to having our own power grid and not sharing with the rest of the country?
I definitely think that we should be a part of the power grid with the rest of the country. for multiple reasons. I know Texas usually has like an excess of power. Sometimes we've had that. And so we could sell the excess power to the rest of the country if they ever needed it. But also we could get power from the rest of the country if it ever came down to it. It would have been easier with everything that was going on. And so I think it wasn't smart for Texas to just rely on itself. That's why we live in a country that's of 50 states and we work together. It's a whole part of that. But Texas, for some reason, just wants to be its own country so bad.
And I think that El Paso serves as a contrast to that and evidence that that is a real problem. So El Paso, they are not part of the same grid. And I want to share this video with you. Okay.
But ABC7's Brando Chavez explains why El Paso is faring far better than the rest of Texas.
10 years ago, El Paso Electric implemented rotating power outages because of a massive winter storm, and thankfully, that's not the case this time.
You know, the rest of the state is not faring so well.
Millions of Texans without power due to a historic winter storm. And ERCOT, or the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which oversees 90% of Texas's electrical load, ordering rotating outages early Monday morning.
There are no plans of that currently at this time. There are no managed outages or rolling outages planned, and because we've been preparing and our system has been able to maintain that reliability.
El Paso is one of the few regions not under ERCOT, as El Paso Electric says they own the local grid. Improvements they made after the big freeze in 2011 seem to be working. Only 875 customers experienced an outage of more than 5 minutes Sunday alone. Generators were replaced and added with antifreeze protection. Plus,
the Montana units out in Far East El Paso we did not have during the freeze.
Even with thousands working from home because of the pandemic, you'd think peak electricity levels would be significantly higher this year. But
back in 2011, the consumption of electricity is around the same amount of electricity use that's being used today. You know, perhaps it's counterintuitive. You would think that you'd be seeing more of an increase, but actually it's the same that we see during our February demand levels. When you see the comparison to the rest of the state and perhaps parts of the country, you know, we are fairly positioned.
And as of 5:30 this afternoon, only about 50 customers had some sort of power outage in El Paso alone.
Wow. El Paso decided to purchase their own power grid and take it into their own hands to control the power grid. I love that. And they have decided to winterize everything.
They mentioned in the video that ERCOT doesn't, like, they're not under ERCOT's command or whatever. They're also not part of the Texas grid. They also mentioned ERCOT. I wonder why. Like, it feels to me like what they really did had nothing to do with ERCOT and everything to do with they probably followed the best
federal regulations.
What we need to know is what are ERCOT's best practices?
Yeah, they probably, I mean, I would think that they probably followed their, like, the federal regulations of the rest of the country. I would even think that ERCOT probably doesn't hold the standards that the rest of the country does, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, ERCOT claims those best practices worked well in 2018, and they thought we'd be okay this time. This Texas doesn't require power generators to weatherize equipment to withstand storms. But even if ERCOT had put that in their guidelines, we don't require them to follow ERCOT's guidelines. So is the problem ERCOT's guidelines, or is the problem a lack of regulation? Because guidelines don't matter if you don't have to follow them.
Texas has its energy in a profitable business. And basically what happened was they were the PUC were the ones to sit on available power supply until scarcity pricing caps were raised, because energy in Texas is a for-profit business. And she put energy in Texas is political cronyism.
It's worse than you are hearing from everything that I've learned from reaching out to the people that I've met across the 254 counties of Texas. Folks have gone days now without electricity or water at their homes. They're huddling together in their in-laws' homes, or they're going to the library, which is on generator power, or they're going to the civic center, which has been converted into a warming center, at least as long as there is capacity for more people to get there. Folks are very desperate. They're suffering. And as you know, far too many have died already. And I worry what's going to happen over the next 24 hours. Almost every major city in Texas tonight will see sub-freezing temperatures, and many of them will not have electricity or power. So much of this was avoidable. Going back to the deregulation of our electricity grid here in Texas, which has created an incentive to actually not weatherize or protect against these events, so that some of your plants can be shut down and you can profit from the spiking prices for energy and electricity. Of North America cannot provide the energy needed to warm and power people's homes in this great state. We are nearing a failed state in Texas, and it has nothing to do with God or natural disasters. It has everything to do with the leadership and those in positions of public trust who have failed us.
And I was watching over the past week the chorus of people who were laser focused on Mark Cuban, the Dallas Mavericks, and whether they were playing the Star Spangled Banner. That includes Dan Patrick. Ken Paxton had something to do. This tweet to Greg Abbott, for your lack of oversight, vision, investment, and planning with Texas Power Grid ERCOT, but hey, let's make a Texas law to force Mark Cuban's basketball team to sing the national anthem. Priorities. I mean, obviously people can walk and chew gum, but it does seem like, there are way bigger issues for the state of Texas right now, particularly amidst this emergency and even in the medium term.
Governor Abbott's State of the State speech, which he gave within the last few weeks, he listed 5 top priorities. Nowhere mentioned in those top 5 priorities was COVID or the vaccination rollout or the need to protect our fellow Texans against natural disasters like these. As you mentioned, climate change and the changing in the frequency and severity of natural disasters, from Hurricane Harvey to this cold blast right now to future weather disasters. We know this stuff is coming. What we don't know is whether our leaders are prepared to make the tough political decisions to prepare us for that.
Felt to me like that was pretty much just him criticizing our current lack of leadership.
Yeah.
There was no, okay, so there was some things he said in there that I really liked, like the need for transparency and the need for some real leadership.
I liked the part where he was that part where he was kind of coming at the leadership.
Yeah.
I guess he said that they were more concerned about that, creating a law to force the basketball players, which is pretty insane that that's what they were doing instead of warning the citizens to be prepared for the storm that's coming.
With climate disaster, it's going to continue to just get worse. Like, this is just the beginning, people. And we are seeing the value. If you just look at how all these disasters are being handled, you can see the value of good leadership where it's working. And we can see this with how El Paso is doing it really well. I did come across an interview where Abbott was asked who's going to pay for the damage, like the damage to the pipes. And he answers, and I'm going to play his answer here.
For those who have insurance, it will be insurance that will pay for damage to homes. Those without insurance, there is the possibility to seek a FEMA claim for it. Those will be details that we will be working with homeowners on.
Yeah, I think the biggest person, in my opinion, to blame would have to be Governor Greg Abbott, just because he was the person who appointed a lot of the people who were in charge. And he has a lot of oversight over all of this. And we have actually experienced a really bad winter storm that led to a lot of power outages, very similar to what just happened this week in 2011. And if we had been smart enough to realize that that was a problem in 2011 and winterize our infrastructure, we had 10 years. We had 10 years to prep for this. And the state of Texas did nothing. So it just shows you that living in a state that's ran by politicians that don't believe in government is bad.
If they don't believe in government, why are they even there?
Exactly. We live, but we do. We live in a state that's literally overseen by Republicans at every single level of our government, and Republicans are well known for their belief of small government, states' rights, but then the states don't even do anything. So it's like, man, what do they fight for states' rights for when the states don't do anything? When you look at it, it all starts with like the legislation, the fact that we have a privatized power grid, the fact that there are no federal regulations, the fact that we haven't been working towards winterizing. There's just so many things that we could have done to prevent this.
We left it to the market to regulate itself, and the market chose
not to. We'll just worry about it when we get there.
And now, okay, so now what's going to happen is the cost of restoring everything is going to be massive.
Yes, I saw that there's a giant price surge.
We will be paying for it as customers in our electric bills. And they are calling it increased demand, but let's be frank, we are paying for a lack of oversight, a lack of preparedness. We are paying for poor business practices. We are paying for failure to prepare.
So, for companies to not further invest in the future, because I mean, they failed as companies and now they want us to help them fix it. If this was any other company, they would not be able to get away with that. And we as customers don't have any choice of taking our business elsewhere. We're stuck. We want power, we've got to pay them. But just like you said, it's poor practice. They took it upon themselves to not maintain their power plants, and they took it upon themselves to not winterize. They decided to just keep all the money that they've been making and not invest in the future and invest in being prepared to protect their customers, like they want to call us. And now they're like, we'll just make the customers pay for it.
We have to pay for them to fix their damaged equipment.
Yep. So. And it's their fault for breaking it. That's crazy.
A real free market would have competition, wouldn't it? I mean, I haven't started studying economics yet. Seriously.
Yeah. A real free market would definitely have competition. Yes, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed. If you have any comments or questions, opinions, leave them down below because we love to hear what you have to say in the comments.
And remember to subscribe.
Yes, because we will be back.